Good afternoon. My name is Samrat. I'm the representative of your access. For those of you who already have been with us for some time, know that we do a lot of interesting things for our research community, for career development, for finding suitable fellowships, grants. And today, I'm very happy to invite you and welcome you to our next career development webinar, a webinar series which we've been organizing with Taylor and Francis on publishing in academic journals. And today's topic, a very exciting and a very important one, is on publishing ethics and integrity. So as you know that publishing is a very complex process which requires not only your manuscript to be up to the standard of the publishing house, but also it requires to follow ethical guidelines when it comes to research. And that's very important for the top ranked peer-reviewed journals in this world. They put a very strong emphasis that the work they're publishing, that the author and his or her work is following the ethical standards, the global standards. And we are very happy today actually to bring you an expert on this topic, Dr. Fulu Akinduro Aye. A very warm welcome to you. Happy to have you with us. And I'll just give a brief background about Dr. Fulu before I hand over the mic to her and allow her to present this very, as I said, very important topic to you. Just a few notes about this webinar. We are gonna, as you know, we're gonna have a recording of it, and also the presentation of it will be shared with you afterwards. For all the attendees, you will also receive your attendance certificate in the coming days from this webinar. So please bear with us. As soon as we have everything ready, we will send you the presentation, the link of the recording, and of course the certificate. Right? There is a Q&A chat box where you can post your questions. And after Dr. Fulu's presentation, we will have the time, a dedicated time, for a Q&A session with her. So please write your questions into the Q&A and not into the chat box. Sorry, there's one function called questions. Put your questions there and we will pick them up. Okay, so just to introduce Dr. Fulu briefly to our audience. She is a research integrity manager with the publishing ethics and integrity team at Taylor and Francis. Before working in publishing, Dr. Fulu spent 9 years as a PhD researcher in basic skin biology and as a postdoc researcher in stem cell biology and leukemia. And she was also a tutor supporting students in identifying and understanding good research. So this is also, I think, very good for us and for you that Dr. Fulu is not only representing the publisher, but she herself has been a researcher and can give also a perspectives from a researcher's point of view. Dr. Fulu joined Taylor and Francis in 2021, where she provides investigative support and advice on research ethics and integrity cases, and she contributes to the continuous improvement and of editorial processes and policies. So once again, Dr. Fulu, a very warm welcome. Happy to have you here with us in India, virtually, of course. You are right now in London. But now today we're all together in the virtual room and we're very much looking forward to your presentation. I'll hand the mic over to you.
Thanks so much for the lovely introduction, Dr. Samrat. It's a pleasure to be here. And so today I do intend to give you an insight into ethics and integrity in scholarly publishing. So I'll just get my slides to move. So what I will address today is provide some insight on who guides publication ethics. I will show you some of the common issues which we often encounter as publishers, and also highlight how we do address these with more emphasis on the post-publication period, so after an article has been published already, by issuing post-publication notices such as corrections, expressions of concern, or retraction notices. I will also include some case examples from Taylor and Francis journals, and finally provide some tips on how researchers can avoid encountering such problems. So, publishing ethics. What is publishing ethics? So this is a consensus-based system that has been established through the working together of multiple stakeholders. And these stakeholders are very often societies or professional associations who have come together to establish best practice guidelines for ethical conduct. And one of these very important key players is the Committee on Publishing Ethics, or COPE. So COPE provides resources, guidelines, and standards that editors as well as publishers use, and to ensure that they continuously provide the same standard in publishing ethics through all their activities. So COPE consists of editors, academics, various experts from diverse fields, and also publishers. So as you understand, these groups of individuals from with diverse knowledge, expertise, areas come together, and they develop these consensus standards and best practice guidelines. So Taylor and Francis is a member of COPE, and so we do adhere to these standards. And the reason why publishers do this is to ensure that the integrity of the scholarly record can be maintained. And this is important because it allows readers to then trust what they read. And so they can then go on to build on the current evidence base and inform their decisions and develop their work and their research studies, and then go on to publish as well. So as researchers, you probably are quite well aware of the various stages a manuscript goes through prior to publication, the submission process, the revision, all these stages before it actually becomes available online and also in hard copies. So today I will focus more on the post-publication period, because it seems this is a period that is not quite well understood or often neglected. And we as publishers lay emphasis on ensuring the integrity of the scholarly record, also after publication of articles, so after these have been accepted and are published. So when any concerns arise post-publication regarding a published article, the editors, as well as the publishers, are responsible for investigating this. And we are responsible for ensuring that the integrity of the scholarly record is maintained. So we then would have to address these concerns. And the main way by which we do this is by issuing post-publication notices. And the two most commonly used notices that we use is a correction notice, which is issued when there are very minor errors in a published article, and we need to correct this, or a retraction notice when there are more significant concerns regarding the integrity of the article that has been published. I must point out that when concerns are raised to the editorial team and to the publisher, we do contact the authors. We'll try to work together with the authors to resolve these issues. Under some circumstances, we do consider publishing other notices, like an expression of concern or a removal notice, but I will go into these two in more detail a bit later. The main thing to remember is that after publication, the integrity of the scholarly record still has to be maintained. And this is usually done by issuing post-publication notices where concerns have been raised and errors are required to be corrected. So these post-publication notices are notices that are attached to the original article. So the original article is not changed, but these post-publication notices are directly linked with the original article. And these are permanently linked, so they cannot be removed. And the purpose of these post-publication notices is to ensure the scholarly record is corrected, and also to ensure the integrity of the scholarly record. So they are not intended to blame any of the parties involved. So now I will explain each one of these notices in more detail. So to the correction notice, as just already mentioned, this is considered when there are only very minor errors to correct, and these errors do not affect the conclusion. They can be very minor errors like spelling mistakes or an error in a table. The main concern is that they do not affect the outcome of the study. And also, there has to be no concern regarding the overall integrity of the article. And we have to make sure that there has been no serious breach of publication or research ethics. Then we would go on to publish a correction notice. And I will show you an example of such a correction notice. So this is an example of a correction notice that was published for an article from Taylor and Francis. And what's highlighted here in the red box is that the what is being corrected is being mentioned and is being flagged up. So in this example, it states the article was published with an error in Table 1 in print and online versions. The errors were reported in the mean and standard deviations of two factors, which are the conceptual knowledge and transfer of independent variables. And the corrected version of the table has been provided. So as you can see, this would be directly linked to the original article. So anyone accessing the original article would be made aware that there has been a correction made to a table. Then I'll move on to the next correction notice that we also unfortunately sometimes have to use. This is a retraction notice. And this we consider when there have been situations of serious breach of publication ethics. This can be in the form of plagiarism, for example, or duplicate publication, or where the research integrity and ethics is also concerning or may have been breached. An example would be unethical research, for example, where animal or human studies have been conducted, but they were done without having ethics approval from the relevant body, for example. Then we would work with the editors, publisher and editor work together, and also notify the authors that such a retraction notice would be required. Sometimes retraction notices can be instigated by the authors, and this is often cases where there has been an honest error. Often this is with regards to the data, and so the authors cannot guarantee the integrity of their article anymore. And so, of course, we then work together with the authors, the editors, publisher, authors, all work together to publish this retraction notice. And in the retraction notice, we would also provide the reason for the retraction. So these are factual. And in a case where the authors instigate this, we would then also mention that the authors had flagged this up and would want to retract their article. Sometimes when concerns are flagged to us, and we contact the authors don't respond, then we have to contact the institutions. In a few cases, the institutions are also not responsive. However, where we do have significant concerns, we still have to take action because it is the responsibility of the editors and the publisher to ensure that the scholarly record is maintained. So then we still have to go on and publish a post-publication notice. Again, similar to the correction notices, these retraction notices are not to blame any party. They are just intended to correct the scholarly record. So when an article is retracted, there will be a watermark across it. The article will remain online, but it will have this watermark stating retracted. This is so that any reader who accesses this article will be made aware that this article has been retracted. Furthermore, the retraction notice would be linked to the original article, and the retraction notice will provide the reason for the retraction. And I will show you an example. So this is an example of a retraction notice that was issued about 2 years ago. And what's highlighted here in the red box is that we, the editors and the publisher of the journal, are retracting the following article. Then the retraction notice goes on to provide the details of the article and also the reason for the retraction. So in this case, it states, since publication, concerns were raised about the integrity of the data in the article. When approached for an explanation, the authors checked their data and confirmed there are fundamental errors present. Therefore, they have agreed to the retraction of the article, and the authors apologize for this oversight. So as you can see, it gives a very brief summary of the concerns regarding the data, what has been done, authors were contacted, authors confirmed the errors, and authors agree that the article should be retracted. So another post-publication notice that we sometimes have to consider is an expression of concern. Now, this is used in cases where an investigation has been inconclusive and further investigations are required, or if an investigation is taking a very long time, but it's important to let the public know that concerns have been raised regarding the integrity of the data in the article. This is especially important in certain study types, for example, in clinical trials where the outcome of the study could be used to inform clinical decision making. Then it really is important to flag to readers that there are concerns so they can interpret the content of the article with caution. So the purpose of these expression of concerns are to alert readers to concerns that exist regarding the article. However, we have to be very careful when we consider publishing these, because these are permanent post-publication notices. So we do have to have enough evidence to support their use. Similar to the other post-publication notices, the authors are informed prior to the publication of these. And I will show you an example of such an expression of concern. Again, before these are published, investigations are conducted by the editor in collaboration with the publisher. And in this case, and also the reason for the expression of concern is provided. Like in this case, it states, after publication of this article, questions were raised about the scientific integrity of the article content. And the editor and publisher have reached out to the authors requesting that they supply information that would confirm the article's integrity. But the authors have not responded to our queries within the requested timeframe. Therefore, as we continue to work through the issues raised, we advise readers to interpret the information presented in the article with due caution. So it does let the readers know that there are concerns regarding the content of their article, and the investigation is still ongoing. So caution should, the conclusions of the article should be interpreted with caution. Under very rare circumstances, do we consider publishing a removal or notice. So removals are only considered under specific circumstances, and that's if the content of the article is defamatory, if there are legal concerns regarding the content of the article, or if the content is subject to court order, or if there is a high risk of harm if the recommendations of the article are acted upon, or if there has been a breach of privacy. So with removals, the content of the article would be removed, and in place, the reason for the removal will be stated. And here's an example of such a removal notice. And in the red box, you will see the reason for the removal. So in this case, it states, the editors and publishers are withdrawing the above article from publication for legal reasons. So as you can see, we do lay emphasis on providing the reason for the post-publication notices and these notices so that the readers understand the kinds of concerns that are related to the articles and interpret the conclusions of the article with caution. So why am I showing you all this regarding how we handle concerns that are flagged to us post-publication? And this is because over the years, the number of articles that have been retracted have increased dramatically, as you can see here. So in 2015, there were 10,500 retracted articles, as was shown in this one study published in Science in 2018. And we actually suspect that this number is much, much higher at present. And unfortunately, the majority of articles that were retracted were due to fraud. And when we say fraud, we refer to issues like data fabrication, falsification, plagiarism. There have also been cases of other misconduct like fake peer reviews. Now speak about the various, the common issues which we encounter in a bit more detail. So here's a summary of what we often encounter as publishers. So very often there are issues regarding authorship, and these are often authorship disputes. We also see things like authorship for sale. So these would be articles that have been prepared by researchers, but they offer further author positions for sale. So other authors could essentially buy their way onto the article. Other issues which we see are misrepresentations of affiliations. Inappropriate citations occur as well. And these are often to increase the visibility of the articles of certain researcher groups. And very often they are unrelated to the article itself. We do encounter issues with competing interests, also consent to publish identifiable information, and this also includes acknowledgement. I will speak about this in a bit more detail later. We see biased reporting of research, image manipulation, or the use of stock images. So when we say stock images, these are images that are repeatedly used across publications by different author groups who are completely unrelated. Often we encounter duplicate submission and publication, data fabrication, plagiarism, text recycling that leads to redundant publications, peer review manipulation. So when we say peer review manipulation, there have been instances where fake peer review accounts have been established, and so the peer review has been compromised. Data sharing issues, breaches of copyright, unethical research. This unethical research refers to especially animal and human studies, where these have been conducted in a manner that isn't in line with current standards and guidelines, where ethics approval is missing, or there are concerns regarding the informed consent procedure. Articles that include propaganda or controversial content. We have an issue with paper mills. So paper mills are associations that or institutions that prepare fake articles and provide these for sale. So authors can essentially buy an article, put their names on it, and claim it as their own. However, these are fake articles. We also sometimes have issues with fake guest editors or even fake authors, so fake author accounts being established. And very often these are scholars who are very well known in the field, and a fake account is set up for these with a fake email address. Sometimes the names, the very minor changes in the names that wouldn't be spotted immediately. And so these are put on the article because the authors think this increases the chances of their articles being accepted. So now I will focus on a few of these common issues and yeah, to give you an insight into what we encounter and how we address these. So first, I'll focus on authorship. So who is an author, and what does authorship mean? So an author is anyone who's made a significant contribution to the work. And this can be at various time points during the study, such as the conception, the study design, the execution of the study, acquisition of the data, its analysis and interpretation, or in multiple points, many of these areas. We also expect authors to have contributed to the drafting and writing of the article, be involved in the revision and critical review of the article. It's important that each author on the article has agreed to the journal to which the article will be submitted. It's also important that everyone who's an author on the article has reviewed and agreed to all the versions of the article. This includes prior to submission, during the revision, the final version that's been accepted for publication, and also at the proofing stage if any changes have been made to the article. It's important every author agrees to these. Therefore, everyone who's an author on an article agrees to take the responsibility for the article and be held accountable for the contents of the article. Therefore, all co-authors share the responsibility to resolve any questions that may be raised regarding the accuracy or integrity of the published work. So it's important to remember that anyone who's listed as an author on the article is a representative of the published paper and shares the accountability with the co-authors for this article. Authorship comes with legal responsibilities. So the corresponding author often signs the author publishing agreement on behalf of the co-authors, but all co-authors are legally bound to this agreement. So I'm going through this authorship in a lot of detail because we found that very often what constitutes an author is not very clear. So I hope I've been able to point that out now in detail. Another section of articles that is often overlooked or misunderstood is the acknowledgement. So it's important that anyone who may have contributed to an article but doesn't fill the authorship criteria is considered for the acknowledgement section. However, it's important that before adding anyone to this section, these individuals would have been notified by the authors and their permission to name them on the article has been sought. This is important because it gives these individuals the option to not to be named, and they might have their reasons for that, or also to identify any potential authorship disputes that might arise at a later time point. So for example, some individuals who would be named in the acknowledgements may think they should actually be authors on the article rather than just be named in the acknowledgements. So it's very important that this is sorted out prior to submission, because any authorship disputes that then arise can delay the publication of the article. At submission, authors are also required to state that they have obtained agreement from those they're naming in the acknowledgement section. So it is important to obtain their permission prior to submission. So with regards to authorship disputes that occur, it's important to remember that authorship disputes cannot be resolved by publishers and editors. These need to be resolved by the complainant and all the authors on the article. So they're required to reach a consensus, and then any changes can then be applied for and made by the publishers and editors. If the complainant and the authors cannot reach a consensus, the institution might need to get involved. And if an authorship dispute does arise before the manuscript has been published, all publication activities will be stopped until the dispute has been resolved. And this, of course, leads to unnecessary delays in getting the manuscript published. And then it's important that all the authors agree to the final authorship list, and this includes anyone to be added or removed before the process then goes on and the article will be published. When authorship disputes arise after publication, these are a bit more complex to resolve. Therefore, it is quite important to lay emphasis on ensuring that the authorship list is in order prior to submission. I will now move on to competing interests. This is another section that is sometimes misunderstood. So when submitting an article to a journal, it's important to have a look at the editorial policy on competing interests. We recommend always focusing on transparency. So transparency is key. Often issues arise when authors have associations which they do not perceive to be competing interests, but others perceive these to be competing interests. Therefore, it is important to consider what others might also perceive to be competing interests. So here's a long list of what could be seen as competing interests. I won't go through these now, but the slides will be made available later, and if you'd like to have a look at these in more detail, you can do so later. Next, I'll move on to the issue of duplicate submissions and publications. It's important to remember that an article cannot be submitted to more than one journal at the same time. So an article can be resubmitted to another journal if it has been rejected at one, but one article cannot go to two different journals at the same time. Authors are required to declare at submission that the manuscript has not been submitted elsewhere. And again, prior to publication, authors are provided the publishing agreement and are required to sign this legally binding document. And again, they're required to confirm that they haven't submitted the article anywhere else where it's being considered for publication. Although the corresponding author signs this agreement on behalf of the co-authors, it's important to remember that all co-authors are collectively accountable for the agreement and are also collectively legally bound to this agreement. So again, it's very important to understand that the same article cannot be submitted elsewhere at the same time. And I will show you such a case where a duplicate submission has occurred and how it was resolved. So an article was submitted to Journal A, and readers alerted the editor of this Journal A that this is prior after publication, that the same article had been published by another journal, Journal B. The editorial team investigated this and found that it really was exactly the same article with the same content and same author list that was submitted to Journal B, and then 3 weeks later it had been submitted to their journal, Journal A. The authors were asked for an explanation for how this could happen because they had been asked about this twice at submission and when signing the author publishing agreement just before publication, where they're required to state that the article was not under consideration at another journal. The authors explained then that there had been a miscommunication within their group, and that there was a misunderstanding regarding which journal they were going to submit the article to, and also there was no clarity on who was the corresponding author. However, when the authors were asked why they didn't flag up this issue when they then received 2 different peer reviewer reports from the 2 different journals for the same article, they couldn't provide an explanation. This then resulted in the article being retracted from Journal A because the initial submission had been made to Journal B. So Journal A was seen as the redundant publication. So this was retracted. So there are some instances where a duplicate submission may be deemed all right. And I will try to explain these. So duplicate submissions can be considered if the second submission is a translation. So in such situations, it must be made clear that the submitted version is a translation, and it has to clearly cite the original article. Furthermore, the name of the translator must be provided. And it's also important that authors make sure that they do not breach any copyright or reuse restrictions. However, it's important to remember that the accepting of a translated article, which essentially classifies as a duplicate submission, is at the editor's discretion. Sometimes data is presented at conferences, and this can be in the form of short abstracts. This is usually fine. Issues only arise where the abstracts have been subjected to for peer review and then are published and obtain a DOI, and so are citable. So this actually counts as a publication on its own. So data from such abstracts or conference proceedings can't be reused and republished. That would be seen as a duplicate submission and is not okay. Sometimes data is posted in repositories or on preprint servers. This is still fine. However, we do recommend transparency is key. It's important to highlight to the editor all previous versions of any articles that may have been published anywhere. Where authors are not sure of whether certain parts of their data constitute a duplicate submission, they can contact their editor and place a pre-submission inquiry to obtain the right guidance and the editor's view on this unique situation. Next, I'll move on to plagiarism and text recycling. So plagiarism is the use of another person's or group's ideas, processes, data, or words without giving them the appropriate credit. This does not only include content from journals, but could also be from books or websites and even from blogs. Text plagiarism can be detected by software like Authenticate. And if any text plagiarism is identified on submission, this usually results in an immediate rejection. Any alleged plagiarism will be investigated, and this is also post-publication. So we do take allegations of plagiarism quite seriously. There's also the issue of self-plagiarism or text recycling, and this refers to the excessive and repeated use of own data. This can be text, figures, ideas. The problem with this is that it limits the novelty of the findings in the publications, also results in redundant publications. So we do need to address this, and we cannot allow redundant publications to be out there because these distort the scholarly record. So any alleged text recycling has to be investigated, or self-plagiarism. I will now show you a case study of such an issue of redundant publication and text recycling. So in this case, an article was submitted. The editorial team ran the manuscript through Authenticate. They found significant overlap with 2 recently published papers, but these were from the same author group. The text overlap was not only restricted to the method section, but was present throughout the manuscript. So sometimes some overlap in the methods within certain fields may be deemed all right, and this is because there's just a limited way of how a method to do it, a certain procedure can be expressed. However, it is very concerning when the methods completely overlap, and when there's an overlap in the introduction or quite worryingly in the results and discussion, because this should be unique to each article. In this case, many figures and tables had also been reused from previously published papers. So the editor determined that this article had no significant novel findings, and this resulted in the rejection of the article due to the excessive reuse of the author's previously published work, and there were no significantly new findings. So again, it's quite important to try and avoid recycling own data and text. So now I'll move on to some tips on how authors can avoid encountering such problems. And first I'll focus on authorship, where there often are issues. So it's very important to agree on the authorship early on while preparing the manuscript. And it's important to keep in mind what constitutes an author, the criteria for authorship, and also the responsibilities that come with an authorship. It's important to ensure anyone who meets the authorship criteria has been included, and also that a corresponding author has been appointed. However, all authors need to be aware of the role and responsibilities of the corresponding author. So the corresponding author needs to make sure that all authors agree on which journal to submit to, all authors agree on changes to the manuscript, and this includes any changes to the authorship list. It's important the co-author needs to ensure all authors provide relevant declarations. This includes funding or competing interests. The next tip is with regards to storing original data, and the fact that authors need to be ready to share their original data if they are requested to do so by the journal's editorial office. And this can occur not only during the review, but even after publication. So it's important to keep this in mind. If there are cases where concerns have been raised regarding the integrity or the content of an article, and investigations are being conducted, authors are then contacted by the editorial office and the publisher, and they're often asked to provide their data. So the only way a thorough investigation can be done, and we can allay any concerns is if we're provided with the required information. This can be documentation or original data. So it is important to bear in mind that these do need to be stored, and authors have to be ready to provide this if needed. Where patient data is concerned, it's important to ensure that this data has been anonymized before sharing it. And again, this is often with regards to clinical trials or sometimes in case studies. The other tip we have regarding mandatory requirements, it's important that authors check the journal's instructions to ensure that they're well aware and adhere to the data sharing policies or data deposition policies, for example. It's also important that declarations on ethical conduct of the study are included where these are relevant. So, for example, when human and animal studies are involved, it's important to include a statement on the ethics approval that this has been obtained, and also provide the details of the appropriate ethics board. If a waiver has been obtained, reasons for the waiver should be provided. It's important to obtain consent for publication for anyone who could be identified, and also keep copies of this consent, just in case any disputes or issues or concerns ever arise at a later date. It's important to include a competing interest statement and funding information, and also acknowledgements. It's also important to ensure that all relevant sources have been cited and references have been made to any previous versions of the article or data. It's also important to ensure that any permissions for the reuse of images or models from third party have been obtained from the copyright or license holder to avoid any further issues occurring post-publication. Also, it's also important that authors check their manuscript for unintended text reuse. This can very easily happen because we all have our thought patterns, we all have a way of expressing ourselves. So it's very important to probably run such a plagiarism checker to help identify any unintended text reuse. Ensure all citations are appropriate and relevant to the content of the article. Yeah, I think that is it from me for now. Yes, so thank you for your attention, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fulu. I would say very comprehensive and excellent overview about the different aspects of publishing ethics, and I think you gave us a very good guideline and overview what the author has to take into account, what are the important features he or she has to consider for his or her work to be published, and also not to be, as you said, rejected, or the concerns not raised. I would say we go straight into a Q&A session with you. I really invite our attendees to please send your questions to Dr. Fulu. She is here today, online live, so it's the possibility, to really reach her and discuss your questions with her. So I encourage all of you, please use that opportunity. Let's start with the first question by one of the attendees. Can I use the images of my paper, which is already published, while writing another paper? Slightly modified, though.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you for that question. So we generally say the reuse of images should not be. Again, we always say transparency is key. So it's not clear to me exactly what these images are. Is this a scheme of a model, for example, or if it's clearly stated that this is an image that has been previously published and it's just being referenced to, it might be all right. However, it depends on the journal and the editor. So as I've mentioned before, it is important to let the editor know if anything is being reused, slightly modified. It's something to clarify with the editor. He can make, the editor would be able to make the best judgment and determine if it's relevant within the context of the article.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question, Dr. Fulu, is on the what if a journal is asking of the original data? is it safe to share it with the journal members?
So we generally say yes. It depends. So it depends on what the data is. If it is patient data or any individual can be identified, we generally say send it anonymized. One. Two, it's becoming more and more common for journals to request for original data to be submitted. And this is because we are encountering more and more cases of fraud. And very often the only way to identify whether it is true and honest data is if you see the original data. I will give an example. So for example, if Western blots are being shown in an article, very often it's just the snippet of the bands. So very tiny bit of the whole big square blot is being shown. And one cannot really tell whether these bands are on the right side, they're the right size, they're from the right blot, unless you see the whole original piece of picture, the whole, all the different pictures of the different exposures, the different probes that have been put on that blot. So very often journals are now more and more asking for original data. And again, I would say if you choose to submit to a journal, it means there's a reason for you to go to that journal. So you have to trust the journal and the editorial team. They will not share the data with anyone else. They actually cannot and should not. So yes, of course, if a journal is asking for original data, the reason is to ensure that it actually is true and honest research. And it's nothing against the individual group of authors, it's just because there's been so much fraud going on. Yeah.
No, makes totally sense. And thank you for giving that a transparent answer on that. Another question we have from Vinay Kumar Dubey. How long should the raw data be kept after the publication, just to be on the safe side regarding any concerns which could arise later? Is there any like limit, or is there a time frame on that? I don't know.
Yeah, that is a very, very good question, I have to say. I cannot give you a specific number of years. So this is difficult to do, first of all, because different institutions have different guidelines. Some institutions say 5 years, some say 10, some say 15. Some don't have any data storage policies, and this is up to the individual research groups. I must say, we as publishers are trying to come to a consensus and provide some guidelines to authors on how long they need to save their data for. We have considered whether each journal should include this in their policies and provide their requirements. But again, this will just lead to lots of confusion. So this is something that there's no general guideline or standard at the moment, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I must say, if an article's been published 2 years ago, we do expect the authors to still have the data. If the article's published 10 years ago and they say they don't have it, we have to believe that. I mean, it does make sense they wouldn't keep it over 10 years if not mandated to do so. So hopefully in the next, soon we'll have some clearer guidelines.
Well, there's a follow-up question from Vinay who posed that question too about the raw data. He's asking, why not have a journal provided servers which can be used to store raw data regarding publication? Is there something like this? Like, do you have like, you store the data?
No. So we, let's put it like this. It's difficult to, for the journal or publisher to provide a data storage for authors. And this is because when a manuscript is submitted, there's no guarantee that the manuscript will be published. And if it gets rejected at any point, we as publishers and the journal itself cannot keep the data of the rejected article. So it makes it a bit more complex to handle. But it is a good question, and it all feeds together. We do soon need to come to some consensus regarding this data storage. It's a very good question.
Yeah, indeed, it's a very good question. Thank you, Vinay, for this raising this question. Another of our attendees, first of all, it's Mubarak. He's saying, thanks for a great presentation. He's asking, how do I know the acceptable similarity index when checking for plagiarism?
Again, a very good question. So very often, I think universities may have a score and say anything above this is not okay, anything below is fine. We as publishers tend not to give a score. This is because each field is different. And like I mentioned, in certain fields, the methods say it's okay if certain parts of the method sections overlap, and so there will be some degree of similarity. This is not applicable to all fields. What we find concerning if there's any overlap in the results and discussion, because this should be unique to the article itself. Of course, there will be some degree of overlap. I mean, there may be 2 or 3 words that are frequently being used, or terms or expressions that are commonly used. However, we recommend don't just look at the score. Ensure that every sentence in the article is as novel as it can be and is unique to the article itself. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't give you a score. Again, like I said, it depends on the field, but most importantly, results and discussion really shouldn't overlap.
Okay. We move on, Fulu. We have another question from King Shug Mukherjee. If we are using images retrieved from any other publication and we duly cite the source, is it perfectly fine to do so? When does the question of asking permission for using images of others come into picture?
So if I understand the question correctly, it is using an image from an article that has been published by other authors and including this in your article.
Right.
Not as your data, though. If this is a review, for example. In general, we always state when doing so using other people's or other authors' images, they should be contacted and made aware that you would like to use their image. This is just to ensure that there's no dispute that could arise at a later time point. Even if it doesn't seem possible at the time, it is also best practice among researchers to notify the other author group that you do intend to reuse their image.
Okay. There's one question about, could you please send some quality links for data storage? Do you have some links for data storage?
So, with regards to data storage, I would say the researchers are actually responsible for storing their own data. As a researcher, I would say I would need to make sure my data is safe. So I would keep it only on stored where I'm sure it can be kept safe, and that has to do with the institution where I'm working. The institution would also have guidelines on data storage, so those should be checked. Each institution is different. I wouldn't recommend storing data on any openly accessible platforms.
Yeah. Fulu, we just have a follow-up question regarding the taking images from a third party and using them. So the gentleman is asking, so this means in all cases we should principally take permission before using already published images. Is that so?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah, okay. Great. And he's saying thank you to you for providing that answer to him.
You're welcome.
No, I think it was a really very well structured, such a clear presentation, and I think you answered a lot during the presentation itself. And but I still encourage our dear attendees. We still have a few minutes, if you like. Dr. Fulu would be available if you have any questions, concerning your own publication right now, or some general questions which would also be helpful for fellow attendees. Please, we provide you the platform now. Otherwise, you of course invited to send your email and questions through email. We will also share the presentation with you again, and also the recording if you like to go back to some of the present parts of the presentations and view them again. So you will of course receive that from us as always. I don't see any new questions coming up at the moment. So if that is the case, I would say thank you so much, Dr. Fulu. It was a real pleasure, and I myself learned a lot during this presentation, and I'm pretty much sure that our attendees, which are over 100 still with us, here they are pouring in with thank you. It was a very interesting presentation. Thank you, Dr. Fulu and Dr. Samrat. But I didn't do much here. All credits go to Dr. Fulu. I just moderated it, but it was a very nice session. And so I would say with this, we, another thank you. It was very helpful for me. So you see that we're getting that response right now live. And so now then I say thank you so much to everyone for joining. Thank you, Dr. Fulu, again. Wishing you a nice late afternoon here in India, and I think lunchtime for you in London.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for having me, and all the best to all the researchers out there. And yeah, it's been great. Thank you, Dr. Samrat, for having me too, and for all the support. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I hope to have you back again soon for another session.
See you soon.
See you soon. Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye.